Welcome to the 10th episode of the MMA Outsider Podcast. I'm Richard Anderson Mann, and joining as always my partner John Buhl. John, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm recovering from a cold and making sure to keep my hyphens in all the right places.
There you go. You don't want to get unhyphenated or too much hyphenation.
No, inside jokes.
The best. Anyway, before we look forward to this weekend's Tough 13 finale card, we have to look back at UFC 130. Not to say that we told y'all or anything, but I feel like even though we didn't pick the winners in all the fights, right, we definitely kind of had a good feel for how they were going to go. So anything particular you want to touch on before we move on?
Yeah, and that's the funny thing with picks. I never really care all that much if I get the fight outcome right. It's more if, I kind of have a good idea of how the fights are going to go. And even though we waffled quite a bit, I think we were kind of right on the money with a lot of them. Though I was surprised. I think the thing that surprised me the most was just that Rampage wasn't able to finish Hamill. Do you think it was the slight hand injury, like he said, or do you think he's just maybe, are we giving him too much credit for how much power he has?
I think a lot of people have been quick to just dismiss it because of the hand injury, which I think is kind of, I don't like to give people that much credit for an excuse. I mean, because if you start letting Quentin Jackson get off the hook for his hand injury, then you have to start letting Tito Ortiz off the hook for his, cracked skull and severed disc and yada, yada, yada. So I don't really want to say that. I think Jackson being a counter fighter, he wasn't able to really tee off because Hamill wasn't throwing the most orthodox of strikes. And I think that's probably why he wasn't able to land, like, the big KO punch. But, I mean, he definitely put a lot of punches on Hamill, and Hamill was worse for the wear at the end of the night.
Yeah. But, overall, though, it wasn't... coming into it, I didn't think it'd be an awesome card, and I wasn't blown away in any shape. But did you think it was, a worthwhile pay-per-view event? Most of what I've been seeing is that the people that spent the full $50 were not that pleased.
There were some fights that were kind of not the most exciting. I don't really know. I mean, it's hard for me to judge that way. Working in MMA, I get money reimbursed, so I don't really look at it the same way as fans. A lot of times I only really feel that way when I make other people watch it with me, and I feel bad because they seem to be bored. But I watched it alone this time, so I don't really know how to answer that one.
Yeah, and like I told you, I was getting over having a really bad cold, so for me, anything that allowed me to not focus on mucus coming out of my throat was just kind of a bonus.
I would also like to have that bonus, but now I can't because you brought up mucus. But anyway, another thing I wanted to touch on before we put it in the history books was the Demetrius Johnson and Miguel Torres fight. I thought that it was a pretty terrible decision. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, it's one of those ones you can kind of see it coming. I do want to give credit to Johnson as far as, fending off the submission attempts as well as he did, and it was a fairly entertaining grappling match as far as, back and forth and ground action, but once again, we saw a guy who was, very active off of his back, and, in Miguel Torres, and we know he has a great ground game, and I think he showed that, and, despite what he was able to do with his jiu-jitsu, the judges once again went with a guy who was on top and just, as they say, controlling a position, which is something that you and I have said is just kind of a stupid way to judge fights. And you had a great article that kind of broke down, some of the problems with judging that keep coming up over and over again. And this fight was a great example of that.
Yeah, it's just strange to watch a fight like that unfold because Demetrius Johnson had absolutely no offense for the first two rounds, and he had some offense in the third round, but he still was manhandled towards the end of the round. So, and I just can't imagine giving him any round but the third. I haven't seen the official cards yet, but I assume that they also gave Johnson the second round because the first round I thought was clearly for Torres. So, I mean, it's preposterous in a lot of ways. They had monitors for this fight. I don't really think this is the kind of fight that monitors help. If you're even cage side looking through the fence, you can see that one guy is fully defensive and the other guy is working to implement offense. And it's just frustrating as, a fan and someone who follows the sport that we still have to deal with this stuff. I mean, Miguel Torres is on the verge of picking up another big win and getting back into the title picture, and now it's almost like back to the drawing board. And it's just, it has a big effect on the fighters, and it's just sad to see the wrong decision get handed out.
Yeah, and what is it? This dates back to, probably earlier than this, but, certainly, I think it was UFC 47 or 48, I think it was. It was the Matt Hughes against Ceruto Verissimo fight, and that one was, a little bit closer, but again, we had a fight where Hughes was, at some points fighting off really, really tight triangle choke holds, and those represented probably the most action, and especially like the first round, and it seemed like the judges said, hey, well, Hughes is on top, so he's winning, and yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to how do you judge a submission attempt, because not all submission attempts are easy to figure out, because like a half-assed guillotine where the guy isn't really in position and the head pops out pretty quick. I don't want to give that too much credit on the scorecards, but at the same time, if you're constantly throwing up attacks and forcing the guy to defend, and how is what he was doing any different than what Diego Sanchez did against Martin Kampmann as far as backing Kampmann up and just throwing punches at him?
Yeah, and I mean, it's really, even when people try to make the argument against it, and this is something I talked about in that article I did for ProMMANow.com today, is that if you look at the rules, there really isn't an argument. Because the rules specifically break down that if you're in guard and you're not working, then it's a neutral position.
Right.
If it's a neutral position and the guy on bottom is forcing you to defend and being offensive, then he's winning.
Mm-hmm.
And so but it's hard to imagine that people are judging something that is defined as a neutral position as winning.
Yeah, but as you know as well as I do, that is not the only area where there's probably some misinterpretation of how you're supposed to score a round. So, it was disappointing, and really, I mean, do you think that there should have been more outrage over this decision, and there wasn't, just because the average run-of-the-mill fan doesn't pay as much attention to jiu-jitsu versus wrestling?
I think that's an interesting point. I'm honestly not sure why there wasn't more outrage. If you actually look around the internet, it seems that everyone in the media is pretty much in agreement that Torres won, but everyone kind of has this like, oh, I don't think it's a robbery, it could have gone either way attitude. But literally, like, everyone I've talked to, well, almost everyone I've talked to, has agreed that Torres won. And it just makes it seem like it's like more of a ripoff because everyone who watched it agrees, except for 2 of the 3 judges.
Yeah, and it's, like I said, it's frustrating. I mean, there's so much psychology, and I'd love to really go into this more in depth, but I remember a guy on ESPN.com a long time ago, back when boxing was still more popular than it was now, did an article about a fight where he tried to score it round by round, and he had one guy winning, and the judges had it going completely the other way, and it wasn't the same situation like we're seeing now. I mean, it wasn't a robbery, it was just one of those fights where one guy was more active, but the other guys maybe had more the crisper shots, and so he went over, everything that went into it as far as, if you go into a fight thinking, fighter A hits harder than fighter B, then that's going to taint how you score the fight. And if you go in there thinking that fighter A is smaller than fighter B, so if he can do more, then you kind of subconsciously give him more credit. And, I bring that up because, let's face it, Demetrius Johnson is a 125-pounder, and I think he'll be a great flyweight. And who knows, it could be something as random as us, we're just giving him a lot of credit because he's a small guy fighting one class above where he's supposed to, and he's doing pretty well for it regardless.
I agree, and perhaps that does play into this fight. I can't really speak for the judges, honestly. I mean, I doubt they're going to give any interviews or try to explain those scorecards, so I don't really want to try to play armchair psychologist with judges because I just feel like that's going to leave me banging my head against the wall at the end of the day.
Yeah, as we saw from that Joe Warren, Marcos Galval fight, sometimes it's better if you don't hear what the judges have to say.
Agreed. Well, I guess it's time we move on to this weekend before I get any more upset. Top 13 finale. If you missed it last week, check it out. We interviewed Danny Downs, who is going to be fighting on the undercard. Going to be an exciting fight. So if you want to check that out, that was episode 9. We're going to try to put it back up with this article so you can check it out. In the main event of the top 13 finale is Clay Guida versus the former WEC lightweight and most railroaded fight in the UFC, Anthony Pettis. Do you think that it's just more and more unfortunate what happens to Anthony Pettis with now the injury to both Gray Maynard and Frank Yeager?
Yeah, and the reason it is, and as great as that fight with Henderson was, as far as the spectacle of the last WEC event and that awesome kick off the cage, I mean, as much as he's been built up and he's an exciting fighter and he deserves the credit he's been getting, if he loses this fight, this is his UFC debut. He's one fight away from going from being a guy who should have been a title challenger to borderline obscurity, because if he's coming in here in his UFC debut and he doesn't get a win, then how many people are suddenly going to write this guy off? And that would be unfortunate, but that's something that I could see happening.
Yeah, and I mean, if he faces another tough wrestler after this, then he's going to be 0-2, and then he might even be getting cut. And that may be one of the precipitous falls you could see. But how do you see the fight actually going down between the two?
Yeah, is it? I'm still trying to get that fight that Clay Guida had against Takanori Gomi out of my head. He was just like headbanging the entire time, and I think Gomi got dizzy watching him. I don't. I think. I mean, Pettis really. I mean, I know he had pretty good takedown defense, but I was really impressed in how well he did against Henderson because, for me, Henderson is fast, strong, sets up his shots pretty well. And Pettis, he had a hell of a time getting Pettis down the few times he did, and a lot of times he came up empty. And I think Guida is a little bit more tenacious than Henderson as far as going for his takedown and trying to get the fight down, but I don't think he's as quick and, he's a little shorter, a little stockier, so I think things kind of even out as far as just because of how relentless he is and how hard he pushes for it. That'll make up for some of the difference, but still, in the end, like with Henderson, I think Guida's going to have a really hard time getting Pettis down. And on the feet, Guida's going to have an even tougher time because he's, I believe, going to be at a bit of a reach disadvantage. And, Pettis is a really good dynamic striker, and he's not going to be doing what Gomi tried to do, trying to knock his head off one punch. He's going to be throwing all sorts of things at him and moving around, good footwork, and it's going to be a tough fight for Guida. I see Pettis winning it personally, but of course you can never count out Guida if he can get the fight down and make it ugly.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'm going to say something that's kind of odd, but I think the only way Guida wins this fight is if he gets a gift decision. I don't really count that out as a crazy possibility. I think it's entirely possible. I think Clay Guida's wrestling is probably one of the most overrated skill sets in MMA. I think that he is a okay wrestler. I think he's able to win fights because he's dedicated and sticks to his wrestling, which is something I'd like to see more fighters do. But I don't think he is a guy who's a world beater in the wrestling department. And I think if he was, he would have beaten Kenny Florian. We saw what Gray Maynard was able to do against Kenny Florian, and Clay Guida looked like he had no idea what he was doing in the wrestling department against Kenny Florian.
Exactly, I agree 100%. And it's like you said, he's not the most athletically gifted, quickest guy. If you're going to make a video game character and you had Clay Guida, you wouldn't rate his double leg at 100 out of 100. But he never stops, and in a way, it's more the Jake Shields mold as far as not counting the GSP fight, but just going in there and hell or high water, doesn't matter if you get hit in the face, just keep going, push him into the fence and take him down, whatever you can, whatever you have to do. That style can lend itself to some questionable or close decisions one way or the other. He had a close one against Tyson Griffin and Nate Diaz, Marcus Aurelio that split decisions. Some I think could have gone his way, some maybe not. But then you have the fight with Diego Sanchez where I think he got his butt beat for the first round, but he withstood it and almost grinded out a kind of a gift win out of that one. So, in the Sanchez fight, or even it's not going to look exactly like that, but that's the kind of scenario that I think you're hitting on. As far as Guida's going to have to weather a storm, and he's probably going to take more damage. But the way judges look at fights, he could still pull it out.
Well, yeah, and on top of that, even if he does get takedowns, he isn't really a very active guy on top. And I think it's funny that we just talked about Demetrius Johnson and Miguel Torres because Anthony Pettis does have that kind of dynamic guard where he's throwing stuff up and he's going for things. And Guida is definitely a guy who likes to work from inside the guard. Right. So, I mean, I'm predicting a fight where even if Guida does get takedowns, Pettis is still going to be winning on my card. Now, whether that happens and the judges actually reward that remains to be seen. But I'm still going to go with Pettis, even though the judges may play a factor, because I think his takedown defense has improved. Not only did he show it in the Henderson fight, but also against Shane Roller. And I think that, his dynamic striking is going to do well. We've seen Guida get in trouble with straight punches and flying punches. He got caught with that knee from Roger Huerta, and that put him on Queer Street. And Kenny Florian was able to throw those straight jabs and straight punches at him, and that really put him on. And I think Pettis has the ability to do both of those things. So I think this is definitely Anthony Pettis' fight. I'm prepared for a lot of people saying, I told y'all when Guida wins, but at the same time, I'm down with Pettis.